Hello, everybody. Welcome to this benchmarking webinar. Delighted you could join us today. I can see some familiar names popping up. Hello, Karen. Nice to see you again, twice in 1 week. Hello, Christina. Nice to see you joining us. Definitely see quite a few people that we know on here. As always, whilst people are just kind of moving between online webinars, sessions, meetings, whatever it is your afternoon consists of, while we're waiting for people to join, if you could, in the chat, let us know where you're dialing in from today, because we always like to see how far and wide the net has been cast. Oh, hi, Sarah. Nice to see you again. South Africa. Wow. I think you might win today. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Philippines. I've got to work out now which is further from the UK. Is it South Africa or Philippines? Answer on a postcard, please. Maybe they're equidistant. What do you reckon? What do you reckon, Lee?
Got to be. My geography is not the best.
I'll leave that. Someone can look it up in the background. Cool. All righty. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Really appreciate you giving up an hour of your, what day is it? Wednesday. Is it Wednesday already? Where is the week gone? Wednesday afternoon to join us. So today we're going to be talking about benchmarking. I should obviously introduce myself as well. I always forget. We do so many of these now. I feel like you're all old friends, but I have to remember there might be some new faces on the call. So I'm Emma Bridger, and I am founder of both People Lab and EX Space, which I'll talk about a little bit more about in a sec. I'm joined by my colleague Lee.
Hi everyone.
Just waving, and Katie in the background as well. So welcome. So yeah, we're going to be talking benchmarking today, which is a topic that is very close to my heart for lots of reasons. You'll get a copy of the recording and also a copy of the slides and the report at the end. So we did a benchmarking report, I don't know if it was this time last year, but about 12 months ago. And we thought it was about time we updated it. So what we do is we kind of do an independent review of everything that's in the public domain to say what is the kind of latest data telling us. So we'll kind of go through some of that today on the call. So I'm going to share some slides with you, and it's a little bit of interactivity as well. I've got a few questions for you. We'd love to get some discussion going, so feel free to use the chat to ask questions. We'll have it up in the background so we can see what's coming through. Oh, Penzance in Cornwall, that's nice. I'm just having a look at who we got on the call already. Peterborough, been there a few times. Cambridge, Shropshire. Oh, that's you, Lee. I thought there can't be someone else from Shropshire. That's my place of origin. And everyone's like, where's Shropshire? Birmingham, Wales, Shropshire's in the middle. Okay, let's get started then. So I have got some slides to share with you. So let me bring them up. And I'll kind of toggle between the slides and seeing you as well, so that we can get some conversation going. And like I say, feel free to use the chat to ask questions and to use the reaction buttons, or to even be brave and unmute yourself and put your hand up and ask a question. We're always up for that as well. So benchmarking employee engagement and employee experience. So first of all, a little bit about, I mentioned People Lab and I mentioned the EX Space. I'm not going to give you a big sell here, but just to say, People Lab, we are an employee experience and engagement consultancy. We've been going for 15 years, which I can't quite believe that. We help companies of all shapes and sizes, some of who are on this call today, to help them intentionally design experiences that unlock engagement, whatever that might mean. So that's all I'm going to say about People Lab. But if you've got anything that you're working on at the moment, and actually for those of you who are on the EX Space, which Lee's going to talk about at the moment in just a second, make sure you use the EX clinics, because it's basically get an hour of free consultancy with us. So if you're in that place at the moment, like many of us are, budgets are tight. If you're part of the EX Space, use that EX clinic to get your free consultancy. Lee, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about the EX Space for those of you that might not have come across it yet.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emma. So, yeah, we launched the EX Space just under a year ago. And really, it's an awesome professional life support system for anyone in an employee experience or engagement role, or perhaps even a slightly more defined role like internal comms and the like. It contains amazing courses, masterclasses that enable you to become an EX master, as well as incredible tools resources, templates, all the reports you can shake a stick at, news and views, and an incredible and rapidly growing community as well. And now there's no excuse for getting involved in this, because we've recently opened up our entry-level membership, which is called EX Essentials, for free. So you can join now for 12 months for a whole year and pay absolutely nothing. It gives you a taster of the EX space. We hope that you will upgrade and become a practitioner or a pro member and get access to the whole wealth of learning that's in here. But it's a great place to start. So please do take advantage of that if you haven't already. Thank you, Emma.
Thanks, Lee. Okay, let's talk benchmarking. But before we do, I'm going to hand over to Katie, who's just going to run a quick poll so we can get a sense of where you're at with this at the moment. So Katie, over to you.
Thanks, Em. This is where I find out that Zoom have changed where the polls are hidden. So I'm just trying to work out where they've put them. So let's have a little look. If not, oh, here we go. I found it. Right. So the question for everybody is, how do you currently measure employee engagement or employee experience? And the 4 choices there are through an annual survey, through a more regular, like a pulse survey, something else, in which case pop it into the chat, because really interested to know what other ways people are using it. Or the final option, we don't currently measure. So we'll give it a couple of seconds for people to pop their answers into that poll. Okay. Well, some people do both. So I should have had an option for both, really, shouldn't I? So that's great. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll there and I will share the answers with you. Okay, so pretty even between annual survey and regular pulse survey. So we've got 44% of you run an annual survey, 37% run a regular pulse survey. I do see a few people in the chat saying they actually do both, which is great. What else have we got coming through in the chat? So we've got a few people saying, yeah, a mix of all project or program specific experience studies. That sounds really interesting, Jana. 6 monthly survey plus moments that matter metrics. I love the idea of moment that matter metrics. I definitely think we'd have to delve into that with you at some point, Emma.
Yeah, Emma, tell us more about that. Let's get you on for a webinar to talk about how you do moment that matters metrics. We love the idea of that.
Definitely. And then 15% say we don't at the moment. So that's really interesting. Thank you very much for sharing, everybody.
Yeah, it's trademarking it now. I don't blame you. Also, it's really interesting to get a feel of how people are kind of, you know, I guess putting that line in the sand and saying, where are we at with it? And I can see, Karen, you're in my view, you know, really interesting discussions recently about, you know, the survey, where it's going, you know, is the annual survey over? I don't know if it'll ever be over, but I think what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing from practitioners is definitely a move towards much more regular insight gathering. So hopefully a move away from that kind of hanging everything off that one number, like so many organizations do, and saying, actually, this is much broader, much more complex than just taking one number and saying, that's what we're going to kind of measure ourselves by. And, you know, as we're getting to the benchmarking webinar here, why there are lots of problems with that. So I think we're starting to see a shift, maybe getting a little bit optimistic on here, but I'd love to hear your views on that as I'm talking. Are we starting to see the shift? And it's a big question, I think, in terms of where we're moving to with measuring this whole world of engagement and experience. Right, I'm going to go back to my slides then. So a little bit of context and background. In terms of benchmarking, and some of you who have heard me speak about this topic before, this will be pretty familiar. So what is benchmarking? It's really about, you know, the ability to not just measure, but to compare yourselves to others, right? That's essentially what it is. And we know that in particular, the C-suite are pretty obsessed with benchmarking because they like to understand, what does good look like? How do I measure up against the competition? You know, is this number you're telling me as a pro, is it good? Is it bad? Is it indifferent? Should I be worried about it? And the aim of benchmarking really is to provide learning opportunities. So, you know, numbers on their own, pretty meaningless. It's what we put around the numbers that really bring those numbers to life. You know, what is this telling us? So, you know, in essence, in its purest sense, I think benchmarking can be a good thing. Lots of different types of benchmarking. So I think the one we're mostly familiar with is that second bullet there, that external kind of benchmarking. So how do we stack up against the competition? How do we stack up in the industry? You know, those external benchmarks. But I think for me, the internal benchmarking is as important, if not more important, in terms of what do we want our own benchmark to be? What does good look like for us? You know, I mean, I come from a background of research psychology, and you know, I've worked in the area of stats for many years. I used to lecture in stats for my sins many years ago, and we know that, you know, you kind of use numbers to tell lots of different stories. So that context is really, really important. And the other question is, what are you comparing? You know, so first of all, who are you comparing yourselves to? And secondly, what are you actually comparing? Are you comparing your performance in this world? For example, an engagement index is a good example of a performance metric. Are you comparing process, for example, performance management, or are you comparing something that's more strategic? Are you looking at more kind of generic best practice or core competency? So what is it you want to compare? Quick show of hands. So we want to go back to the buttons here. Actually, Katie, I'll let you do this bit. I want to make this interactive, not have me speaking to everyone all the time. So
No worries. So either in the chat, or if you do have reaction buttons down the bottom, or if you're happy to go on camera, just a literal show of hands is great. Just interested to know who currently uses the measures that they take to compare their organisation to other organisations or against industry benchmarks. So if you use your current measures to compare yourself against others, show of hands, or use the reactions, or pop it in the chat. Quite a lot of hands I can see there coming up. I would say, I don't know, maybe a fifth of the people that I can see.
okay, it's interesting.
Maybe less than a fifth, yeah.
Not as many as I thought there would be, actually.
No. There may still be comments coming through on the chat that haven't quite popped up yet, but yeah, not many in terms of
Okay.
up.
All right, let's go back to the slides then. So as I said, context is king, and I love this this diagram here. I posted this on Facebook years ago, and it got fact checked and showed to be untrue, and I didn't really know how it could be fact checked, because you know, it's just a kind of a statement. It was not even a statement, really. It's not. There's no facts there, really. It's, anyway, that's an aside, but I think you get the idea. You know, this idea of, you know, to make a fair selection, everyone has to take the same exam, please climb that tree. The context you operate in is absolutely going to play a part. So I understand that, you know, companies want to benchmark against, for example, competitors. So there is context, they might argue there is context there, but there never will be, because once you get underneath what's really happening in your organization, there's always going to be, you know, different elements, different things happening. You know, whenever we work with a new client, we always talk about how can we immerse ourselves in your organization, what's going on for you. And, you know, there's different things happening at different times for different organizations. So they might be going through mergers or acquisitions, or we've just, you know, been a big transformation, or actually it's been really, you know, very stable for the last, you know, 4 or 5 years. Every organization is different, so it makes comparisons really difficult when it comes to benchmarking. So that's one of the first points of what I'd like to make. The other problem is that it's a little bit like comparing apples and pears, as the saying goes in the UK. I don't know if those of you that are at other parts of the world, you might have a similar saying, but we always talk about you can't compare apples and pears. They're completely different fruits. They might seem the same well, look very similar from the outside, but once you kind of get into it, they're not the same thing. Now, the reason that this causes a problem for benchmarking in terms of definitions is that there isn't a single universally agreed definition of either employee engagement or employee experience. There are loads of different models for how companies choose to measure engagement or measure experience. You know, if you go to, say, Gallup Q12, they have a different way of defining engagement and measuring it compared to, say, Aon Hewitt or Qualtrics. So it makes comparisons really difficult. And even if you say, yeah, but we use, say, Qualtrics, we've got a lot of time for Qualtrics, they're a great company, but we use Qualtrics and we just compare ourselves to other people that use Qualtrics. That's great. But going back to this piece, you know, context is different things happening in that organization compared to your organization. And equally, even if you all use the same supplier, you're benchmarking against people using the same supplier, you might find that different questions have been added in. So there are a few suppliers saying, no, you have to use our model and that's it. For example, Q12 is a good example, but a lot of suppliers say, no, you can add extra questions in. Now they'll say, yeah, but we measure engagement or EX on the same questions, but all of these things will have an impact and make it less scientific. There are different ways of measuring as well. So some people use different formulas to come up with a single number, for example, a net promoter score, ENPS. Some people use kind of aggregate a bunch of questions and add the questions together and come, spit out a single number. And when you dig into that, they might say, yeah, there's certain questions that are weighted more heavily than other questions. There's lots of different ways of arriving at that final number. So all of this makes this really tough, right? We know our C-suite want this, but it makes it really tough to have anything that's really meaningful when it comes to benchmarking. But having said that, I still think it can be useful as long as we're really mindful of the challenges and we're really, we're really clear around what this number, what this benchmarking, or what this approach actually means, what it can do for us. So I think that it can be useful. I talk about it as one piece of an overall jigsaw. So yes, it's a learning opportunity. Clearly, if everybody else in our industry is performing, way worse than us, then, well, what are we doing that's different then? How can we learn from that? If they're performing way better than us, what do they do that's different? How can we learn from that? We need to think about the whole picture. So as I said, the survey should only ever be one piece of the jigsaw. It's one way of measuring your performance. I mentioned at the beginning that I'm starting to see companies moving towards more ongoing real-time observation of how their people are feeling, right? And understanding how their people are feeling. So people seem to be moving away from that kind of once a year set piece survey, saying actually that's one really useful measure and tool, but we really need to do a lot more than that to really understand where our people are at. So just think of this as one piece of the jigsaw. I mentioned this many times already. Your organizational context is really critical here. No two organizations are the same. And we hear that all the time as consultants, right? So when we go in to speak to new clients, we'll always get you might have done this for other similar organizations, but we're really different. So your context is really critical there. I would say if you're going to benchmark, you want to benchmark, don't just rely on one data point, one insight. Don't just rely on that one number, for example. We are we're high performance, top quartile on the survey. We choose to use, whether it's Q12 or whether it's Qualtrics or whatever it might be. We are the top quartile of that. That's one sort of data point that's useful. But what else have you got? What else can you bring to that to sort of help make sense of that? Where else are you able to compare yourselves? Can you compare yourself with other case studies? What are the best practices out there? And as I said, it's only one piece of the jigsaw. So I think benchmarking can be useful as long as we're just really mindful of the limitations, that it is like comparing apples and pears. And the bottom line is, let's not let our C-suite get too hung up on this single number. So in terms of, let's talk about employee engagement first of all. So the first thing I would say is that there are a lot of different models and approaches to measure engagement. When I wrote my employee engagement book, first edition came out in 2014, which makes 10 years. That's just crazy. Even back then, there were 50 different definitions and counting. Now, some models come and some models go, but there are still lots of models out there. And what we've done in the benchmarking report this year is we've included some of the key models and approaches to give you a flavor of the different ways, different kind of consultancies or different suppliers are measuring employee engagement. So they're all measuring something slightly different, right? But the common performance measure when it comes to benchmarking in this respect is the employee engagement index. And as I said, there's lots of different ways I've seen that calculated. And there's often quite a sort of science behind it. So just be really mindful of that. Just to bring that to life a little bit, here are some examples of some classic or some well-known models of employee engagement. So Qualtrics, and again, in the report, in the benchmarking report, you get a copy of that afterwards. We go into this in more detail. There's lots of models in there. You can have a look and see some of the ways that people are measuring or are defining engagement and then measuring it. So Qualtrics talk about those 5 bullets there. So that's what they kind of measure around. That's what forms their employee engagement index. The Gallup Q12, I think we're all pretty familiar with that. It's been around for many years. I haven't listed the questions here, but they are in the report. I suppose one of the most controversial questions in Gallup Q12 is I have a best friend at work. A lot of debate over the years as to whether that question should be in there or not. I'm not going to get into that today, but you'll see that doesn't feature on the Qualtrics engagement index. So straight away, we see some difference there. The Employee Net Promoter Score is what ENPS is. And that is where just one question is asked around the extent to which you would recommend this company as a good place to work to other people. And, again, there's quite a complicated way of how ENPS is measured. So you have, I think it's 1 to 7 are detractors, no, 1 to 6 are detractors, 7 and 8 are neutrals, and then 9 and 10 are promoters, and then you kind of add the scores together and you come up with a score essentially between -100 and +100, of which anything over about 30 plus is good. Again, we explain all of that in the report. If you're doing surveys yourself, if you're using things like SurveyMonkey, they've actually got a built-in ENPS question in there now, and it does all the kind of the legwork for you. And Deloitte talk about creating an irresistible organization. So they talk about these sort of areas of meaningful work, hands-on management, positive work environment, growth opportunities, trusted leadership. So you can see there are absolutely overlaps between these models, but they are not the same. They are not measuring the same thing. So it makes comparisons quite difficult, I think. And, you might say, well, we use Qualtrics and we score really highly on that. But then if you were to swap to Gallup Q12, and they measure it differently, you might not score as high. So it kind of, it gives us a good indication, but it's not an exact science, is what I'd say. So just to kind of be mindful of that. Okay. In terms of benchmarking employee experience, I'm really relieved to say that so far, and you might be able to put me right on this, but so far I haven't seen anyone try to come up with an EX index, which I'm really grateful for, because employee experience is so broad and so wide. How could you possibly come up with a meaningful single number that says you've got a good employee experience or not? I think that's really dangerous. In some ways, I think if we were to go back to the beginning, when the employee engagement sort of started to become a recognized discipline, I wish we hadn't gone down the route of an engagement index, because I think that a single number is kind of just too, it's not rich enough. It doesn't really tell us enough about what's really going on. Hopefully we're not going to go the same way with employee experience, she says. But there are lots of thoughts on how we measure employee experience. And I think a really good place to start actually is something that's free and available. That's Glassdoor. I remember when I first started years ago doing some training on employee engagement for the CIPD, public courses. And it's when I first started People Lab, so it would have been about 15 years ago. And even back then, I talked about Glassdoor, and it's really interesting to reflect on how the world has changed, because back then when I talked about Glassdoor, people would be horrified, and they would instantly get their phones out and they start looking up, their Glassdoor ratings. They'd say, this isn't fair. How could people go on and rate our company and talk about how we are? They were aghast at this idea that suddenly the curtain was open in terms of how it felt to work in their organization. People could see behind the curtain. And now I think people see Glassdoor as actually it's really good free data. Thank you. It's great. It's good insight. We keep abreast of our Glassdoor data. It tells us often before our own kind of set piece surveys tell us if we've got a problem. So we love Glassdoor data, and we're all over it. So I think the world's very much changed, but I think Glassdoor is a great place to start. And again, we go to kind of Glassdoor and what they measure on Glassdoor in the report. But a couple of examples here, again, in the report that's new for this year, what I've done is shared some of the, and there's too many to share them all in one report, but I've picked out some of the more well-known kind of models and ways of measuring employee experience, of approaching employee experience. So different models of employee experience. So Jacob Morgan talks about the intersection of culture, technology, and physical space. So his measures are all around those three elements. The Willis Towers Watson's model here talks about these areas of excellence, emphasis, and then essentials. Across the left-hand side, there's the different levels, and across the bottom, you've got the purpose, you've got the work that people do, you've got the way people are rewarded, and you've got the people themselves. And that's broken down further into those elements there. I won't go through them all. So you can see, you get a sense of what they might be measuring if they were going to have a go at measuring employee experience there. So that's just a couple of examples there. And there's a load more models in the report to give you a sense of how people are, you know, approaching employee experience, and therefore how they might be measuring it. And once again, what this does is it illustrates that, you know, a single number would not be a useful way to go. Have we got any questions coming through yet, Katie?
We've actually got quite a good discussion going on in the chat at the moment around survey fatigue. There's talk about well, the question itself is, we keep getting told that we're in danger of our people getting survey fatigue. Is this true in your experience? Just to give you a quick flavour of the conversation around that before we kind of come to you for your thoughts. A few people have said it's more about sort of inaction, about things not happening as a result of the survey. And then obviously the trust is broken, and people become much more sort of cynical about what's the point of filling it in. So there's quite a good conversation on there. So do take a look at the chat when you get a chance to sort of have a look at that. But what are your thoughts on this, Em?
Yeah, I mean, lots of you will have heard me talk about this before, this movement from transactional to transformational engagement. So transactional engagement is very often, we don't really know where to start. It feels really big and overwhelming. So we're going to do a survey to give us a sense of taking action. And suddenly engagement and experience becomes all about the survey. And, you know, we do the survey, and we put all of our effort into it. When we get the results, we spend months, you know, preparing reports for managers and the executive team, and months trying to convince people that, you know, we're doing the right thing, we're taking action. And then suddenly it's the start of the survey again, and nothing's really happened or changed. And you know, when I talk about that, I always see a lot of people nodding their head around the rooms. I love that. I just saw something pop up in the chat. That was what was it? Paralysis by analysis or something. So yeah, paralysis by analysis. I love that. So I often share a story about when I was in house years ago, and I looked after the survey. It was a sort of mid-90s, late 90s. And I was working for a very forward-thinking energy company in the UK. And they brought me in with a background as a psychologist. They brought me in to design and run their first, well, not only just that, but one of the big things, big deliverables I had was to design and run the first ever, as it was called then, employee satisfaction survey. And I was really, you know, excited by this. I was all up for, like, how can we improve the way it feels to work here as a behavior change psychologist? And I had a background in health psychology and well-being. This really got me fired up. And the first few years, it was great. And we did it ourselves. And then the company grew, and there's lots of acquisition. It got really big and complex. And we brought in, you know, a supplier to help us with it. And they were great, no detriment to them. But suddenly I was spending literally weeks and weeks and weeks sat in rooms arguing about reporting hierarchies, arguing about whether a manager should take notice of the results, because actually when the survey was done, their team's completely changed since then. So the results are null and void anyway. And I just thought there's got to be a better way than this. And, you know, I had some conversations with clients and network recently that the world hasn't really changed that much since then. And one client who I won't name, they may or may not be on the call. They're talking about, you know, they have to do a lot of the stuff manually still, and it just takes up so much time. And you think, well, we're so busy getting on the technical side of this right to make sure people get the right reports, and then spending, you know, months on the road doing road shows and going speaking to managers. They're not taking any accountability for this. They're not owning it. They're not even really that interested. What's the point? You know, are we really getting value for money here? Now, I love research. Research is great, but we need to really challenge ourselves on how we can ensure we get value from this process. So hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Em. That's great. There's no other real questions, but again, there's some interesting thoughts on there. There was one question that Lee's already answered, which was, what about the CIPD measure? And Lee has picked up and said that we talk about that within the report.
It is in that, yeah, it is. It's a
I'll
good
hand
one.
back over to you. Thanks, Em.
Yeah, the CIPD, those of you familiar with it, they've changed their way and their approach quite a lot over the last few years, which I think is great because they're really sort of thinking on the cutting edge of like, how do we really do this justice? So definitely check their stuff out, and it's all in the report as well. We talk about the CIPD. It's Good Work Index, I think, off the top of my head, they talk about. So I wanted to share with you our model. This is called the EX Lens model, and this is how we think about and talk about experience. And we developed this model off the back of collecting hundreds of best experience stories over the last 15 or so years. So what do I mean by that? It's like, well, we go into organizations and we ask people to share stories about a time when they had a great experience at work. So rather than with a survey assuming that we know what good looks like and asking questions off the back of that, we're saying, you tell us, what does a great experience look and feel like to you? Tell us a story about that. And off the back of that, you get some really rich qualitative data. Now, we've run hundreds of these over the years in pretty much every part of the world. And when lockdown came along, so 4 years ago now, I thought, you know what, wouldn't it be great to actually analyze all this data? So we always analyze the data for an organization when we work with them, but we've never looked at it as a whole. It's all completely anonymous because by the time we've written our notes up, we don't know where this has come from. There's no names or anything attached to it. So we did that. We analyzed the data, 15 years worth of qualitative data. It was a big task, I can tell you. I had a great research associate from Sussex University to help me with that. And this is what we came out with. So first of all, there are some what we call universal themes of experience. So those words you see in that lens, so growth, meaning, impact, challenge, autonomy, etc. We see those sorts of themes come up for people when they're having a great experience at work, regardless of their age, regardless of their their cultural background, regardless of their tenure, regardless of which department they work in, etc., etc. And actually, the psychology behind this, it stacks up. There's a load of psychology, for example, that shows why belonging at work is really important. We're hardwired to belong. From an evolutionary psychological point of view, if we belong to the in-group, we're more likely to survive. So our brains look for ways to belong. We don't really like to be, in the out group. It doesn't feel very comfortable. Same with connection as well. Those two are quite linked. So there are some universal themes of experience here. But the other side of this, which is just as important, if not more important, is the universal themes only get you halfway. You also have those individual or team or even organizational needs, expectations, and motivations. So what a great experience might look and feel like for me would be very different to Katie, to Lee, to other people on the call. And even as my career's progressed, what was a great experience for me when I was in my 20s at work, it's very different to what a great experience looks and feels like now. So there's no kind of substitute for taking time to go out and actually figure out what good looks like for your people. When you know that, then you can design a survey or questions which are asking the right things, because you know what good looks like for your people. So then you want to measure yourself against that. Now, if you are an EX Space member, what we have, a pro or practitioner member, not a free member, unfortunately, what we have is we have developed a set of questions that you can literally lift and use in your survey that are that will basically measure those universal themes. And we've also made some suggestions for how you would, understand what those individual differences look like. So what we're saying is, we've got half the story here based on evidence, based on research, but always go out and speak to your people and figure out what good looks like for them. And this really comes about, started sort of experimenting with this way of working when I was in-house and, looking after the survey. And some of the questions that were performing really badly, for example, the processes and procedures around here allow me to be efficient and effective. That was one question that always stuck in my mind. And it would always perform really badly. And I thought, you know what? I don't think anyone's ever going to say, I loved working at that company and I was thriving, I was at my best and it was a fantastic place to work and I'd recommend to everybody because the processes and procedures allowed me to be efficient and effective. And yet the amount of work that was done to try to fix that question, think all the wasted time and effort and energy trying to fix that question so we get a higher score on that question, when in actual fact, I don't think it would have made any difference to how people really felt about working for the company. So that's just one illustration of why this approach works. We've put a bunch of benchmarks into the report. I'm not going to go through them all here because that's what the report's for, but I just want to pull a few out. What's really interesting is that I'll be honest, the world hadn't really moved as much as we would hope it would have moved in the last 12 months. Let's take this Gallup one here, for example. Gallup, the latest research from Gallup says 23% of employees around the world are engaged at work, which first of all, just makes me feel really sad because I'm like, that's just not acceptable. Not even a quarter of people are engaged at work. And then Gallup is saying, this is the highest level since we began measuring it in 2009. Like, well, I don't think it's something to be proud of. I'm not blaming Gallup. I keep saying it's like blaming the scales. I'm very often on a diet. It's like me blaming the scales or standing the scales because I haven't lost the weight I want to lose. So I'm not blaming Gallup, but it's pretty depressing. That's the highest it's ever been. And then you compare that to Qualtrics, and their latest engagement score is 68%. Both Gallup and Qualtrics, by the way, Gallup had gone up 2 percentage points from last year. It's all in the report you'll get. And Qualtrics have gone up 1. I mean, that's okay. That's good. At least I suppose it's a step forward, but it's hardly anything to get excited about, is it? 2 points up or 1 point up. And again, I think this just demonstrates the fact that if you use Gallup, you might find that your benchmark is a lot lower than if you use Qualtrics. So, you know, just showing that they're measuring very different things. Because if we have this universal measure of engagement, universal definition, universal measure, then you wouldn't see these massive discrepancies between the way different benchmarks are coming up. And just to illustrate that. The work project, that's from a company called Home. This is Home. We're based in Bristol. They did the work project and they talked about 30% of people would actively recommend where they work, 70% wouldn't. So that's that ENPS score there. So again, pretty depressing. Only 30% would recommend. So it's definitely worth having a look at that. And again, we sort of detail their model of EX and their approach in the report. The civil service, love the civil service because they are so kind. Their stuff's all in the public domain, so great. You can really get into the skin of what's going on in the civil service. So, and wouldn't it be great actually if more of this stuff was in the public domain, because then we can actually start to make some decent progress. But anyway, we are where we are. 58% would recommend NHS is a great place to work. I mean, I think that's, considering what the NHS are going through, I think that's pretty good. So I'd be pretty pleased if I was working in the NHS. I mean, yeah, sure, it could be higher, but think about what the NHS have been through, what they're going through. I mean, that's a tough place to work, right? Down 1 percentage point since last year. And the civil service people survey, I know Karen's on the call, and maybe Karen, you can give us a bit of flavour of this because you're something you're very involved with. They have an employee engagement index of 64% compared to 66 last year. So a little bit of a downward trend in public sector, but nothing, nothing to sort of get too worried about. Just I suppose an early warning flag there. So you can see straight away, I mean, there's such a range of scores here, and that's because there's different measurements going on. But I think we can use this. You can have a look at the different benchmarks that are there, the different models, and say, well, which one is most useful for us in our organization? Which one do we want to compare against? And it might be helpful in that, if you are getting some heat from your C-suite, you can bring in some of these different measures and say, look, actually, there's such a range of scores here. Let's think about what works for us. What do we want our internal benchmark to be? So there's lots more in the pack, in the report that you'll get. But I guess disappointing that things hadn't really changed in the way we would hope they would have changed from last year. On to that point, the big question, why aren't we seeing improvements year on year? So this is I think it's a big question. We're not going to answer it today, but I would love to hear your thoughts or see your thoughts in the chat, or anyone want to raise their hand and mute their mic and share with us. I've got some theories on this. I think because we're so desperately focused on the scales rather than what we actually need to do to see a shift on the scales. We're so focused on the measurement that we're not actually doing the work that needs to be done to see a change in that measurement. We're also seeing as well budgets being cut, teams being downsized. It's a really easy place, isn't it, for finance folks to go when they need to kind of demonstrate that that they're tightening the purse strings here. let's cut some people stuff. So we've seen that in the work that we do. Budgets are just not there at the moment to focus on, deliberately, intentionally designing great experiences that result in engagement. So love to hear your views on that. Is anything coming through on the chat, Katie?
We've got a comment here, which says, in our industry, attrition is high. We change skin every year, so we're asking different employees. So that's quite an interesting one. So because the attrition's high, different people are being asked. So that makes it hard to benchmark as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. So no, I was gonna say it just adds more weight to the argument that, don't hang everything off your benchmark.
Yeah, for sure. Another comment here from Mark saying, I was going to say it might be because of the implementation of change. We're figuring out what needs to be done, but not necessarily effectively implementing. That's another thought on the matter. Just the two of those comments for now, but do keep popping your comments in. Oh, another one's just come through. That's good time. Thank you, Abby. Oh, and another. So expectations of work-life balance post-pandemic, perhaps. People have higher expectations of well-being and engagement now. Abby. And a comment from Sophie. We're never measuring the same thing each year because even with the same metrics, you're measuring a different set of employees, different economic, political circumstances, and different current life events. Another comment here. I think a factor in of the NHS is also struggle with our changing demographics. So changing demographics seems to be quite a big one, for people finding that difficult to get that benchmarking. We haven't really done the work to understand what this means for people and our approaches. Another one, change fatigue, not managing change well. Too much focus on the index rather than the actual experience of the work that sits underneath it, which comes back to your point, Emma. In the civil service, we saw pride in organisation going down, but people still recommending it as a good place to work.
Interesting.
Interesting one. Lack of appreciation. Oh, sorry, misread that. Lack of appropriate action planning, meaning that the response to the survey isn't delivered to the standards that it needs to be to actually shift the experience. And Rianne's commented that they also have that issue, change not being delivered quickly enough. So lots of conversation there in the chat about it. But definitely the things that kind of really stick out for me there is, one, the kind of change in demographic. So therefore you're not necessarily asking the same people. Two is that expectations changing post-pandemic. People have higher expectations around things like well-being now. And three, change fatigue, change not necessarily being managed correctly, and not necessarily managing the responses to those surveys quickly enough.
Yeah, and I've just seen Emma pop up a comment there. The feedback loop is long. Yeah, absolutely. And this is this whole point about I think we'll try and send some stuff out on this this transactional engagement approach. It's reactive, it's rear view mirror stuff. It's always looking behind and say what wasn't working back then, and you're taking it as kind of gospel that what the survey is telling you is what you need to work on. And my whole problem with that is that someone somewhere, some very clever people in whatever consultancy you're using, have decided what questions to ask, and they might not be the right questions. So you do a whole heap of work fixing something that your survey's told you. By the time you get around to it and you've done all your analysis and you've done your stakeholder sessions, you've done your roadshow, you've gone to your council or your steering group and you've done the PACS reports, by the time you actually get around to doing anything, it's almost time for the survey again. It's not a recipe for success, is it? It's not going to work. So what we talk about is using the survey as one piece of the jigsaw and really empowering line managers and teams to have different conversations off the back of the survey. So you start to use your survey as much more just a kind of a sense check, a health check, because you're much more forward looking and moving to what's called transformational engagement. And you're thinking about, where do you want to get to and why? How can an engaged workforce help us to get there? What does good look like for our people? How near or far are we from what good looks like? And how do we know where we're at on that journey? And what are we doing to get there? So it sounds like quite a subtle shift, but it's a very significant shift. So I think that for me is the way forward. And if you are on the EX space, check out the line managers training and toolkit, because that's got everything you need to take this approach that I'm talking about here. So that's on there. Again, it's available for pro and practitioner members, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Katie. Okay. All right, just to kind of finish up then, in terms of the stuff I wanted to share. In summary, just kind of, again, there's more of a sort of summary conclusion in the report, but just to kind of pull this together. So what the benchmarking numbers show us is this is really complex and very diverse, and that actually there's never going to be like a nice, neat single number we can hang everything off. What we also found is that depressingly very little has changed since the last time we checked in. The numbers are still very, very, they're kind of stagnant, really. They're not changing much. And there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. There's no perfect way to measure. So figure out what's going to work for you and your organization. The point I've made a few times is what feels like a great day at work for one person, team, or even organization will never be uniform, right? This is why the way you measure this has got to be right for you. So work with your partner on this, whatever approach works for you, but make sure you do that extra piece around, well, what does good look like for our people? The benchmarks, I think, are useful. They give us clues, but they are absolutely not the full story. And for me, this really comes down to taking time to understand what makes a great experience for our people, not making assumptions about that. And I think if we understand the strengths and limitations of these different methods that I've kind of touched on here today, I think off the back of that, we can tailor strategies to address the very real challenges of the organizations we work in. So every organization is going to have different challenges. So I think by taking this as one piece of the jigsaw, as I keep saying, can really help us to think about what's going to work in our organization. So that's kind of everything I wanted to share with you. I mean, I'm hoping that you'll have some questions. There's a bit of information here in the slides. If you want to kind of, talk further about how to measure this stuff, or how to run best experience conversations, or how to make sure your action planning actually makes a difference rather just feels like kind of a transactional tick box, to get in touch. If you want to find out more about the EX space as well, then we'd obviously love to hear from you. We're doing tours all the time, but yeah, get yourself signed up for the free essentials level as well. And I'm going to stop sharing now, Katie, and ask if you've got any questions. Or Lee, have you got any questions?
I have, if I can jump in, Emma, as you'd expect. I've got one's more of an observation, and I guess as we're going through this, I think, I'm agreeing furiously with you that, benchmarking is very much part of a jigsaw puzzle, and I think that's a great way of looking at it, because I think the biggest danger is that we sort of reinforce this obsession with numbers and with survey data alone. That's the sort of the thing I worry that we feed too much if we obsess about benchmark data. And actually, my own experience doing audits over the years is survey data is great, but actually a lot of the real insight and value comes from qualitative data, from that more insightful talking to people, focus groups, interviews, and the like. And I always worry that when surveys sort of eclipse that kind of data, if that makes sense. Don't know whether you have an observation on that, but I don't want to feed that that addiction to numbers is my worry.
No, I totally agree. And I think, the mixed method approach is always gonna work best, right? So you quant is great because it gives you a whole picture, the big picture, and you can if you use a probability sample, you can generalize the wider population. That's all great. And if you've got some clever stats people, you can look at things like key driver analysis. That's all good. But yeah, the qual stuff is absolutely vital, and we're seeing a lot more companies now use what we call ethnographic research tools, which are kind of user observations. So, really understanding the experience our people are having in their own environments. So, whether it's just do some interviews, some workshops, some observations, online digital observations, but just really using different tools and techniques rather than just the obvious kind of survey and maybe an odd focus group. And we're seeing a lot more sophisticated research techniques coming in now, which I think is great news. The sorts of research techniques you'd see in customer experience, we're now starting to see happen with employee experience as well.
And I see Rianne just asked the question on the back of that, Emma, which is how on earth do we get leaders on board with collecting qualitative data? It's harder, it takes more time, it's often more costly to go get that sort of insight. How do we get them on board when they're so obsessed with numbers?
Yeah, I think it's about that narrative. I think it's about making it really clear that, you know, you're telling that story with the numbers, but, you know, I mean, can't think of the example off the top of my head. There's a really classic example of stats that show that if you took a stat at a face value, it would give you a completely wrong impression. You know, like if you said, like,
Yeah.
you know, 86% of our people are highly engaged, but only 10 people have filled the survey. You know, for example, I know you'd never do that, but just as an illustration. And I think really it's about that evidence-based piece. What we've done with some organizations really successfully is we've actually got a senior team. We've kind of like, we've been pretty honest with them, very honest with them, and sort of said, you should really care about how your people are feeling. You should really get close to how your people are feeling, and encourage and facilitate and empower your subject matter expert teams to understand how your people are feeling. And you wouldn't not do that with customers. So why would you think that's okay with people, with your people? And, you know, just some examples, we've actually got some senior leaders to be part of some of the ethnographic research we've undertaken. And it's a great way to fast track some of the improvements you want to make, because the minute the C-suite see and hear this with their own eyes, they're like, well, why is this happening? Let's get it sorted. And suddenly it's done. And like a quick story, we did a piece of work with KPMG and on onboarding and a bunch of other things. And the sorts of research tools that we used enabled a very, very quick decision to be made, because the evidence was so compelling. So, you know, I mean, I'm sure you've all been in those senior meetings where you're going through the survey results, right? Straight away, you get the people who are very clever with numbers sort of starting to sort of, you know, poo-poo the numbers straight away. Well, hang on a minute. What does that mean there? And how did you get to that percent? And they get so obsessed with the number, they're not seeing the bigger picture. So I think having that qual as well, and it doesn't have to take that long either. I think, you know, you just get a bunch of people on a 60-minute or 90-minute, you know, on a Teams call with a Miro board, you know, workshop something. You can get this stuff done really quickly. You can go and observe people yourselves. You can go spend time with the people. That do they just get on with the day job? You can just watch and see what they're doing. You know, are people smiling around the office? What's the atmosphere like? You know, so these sorts of insights really give power to what it is you're trying to do as a practitioner, I think.
I'd agree. I'd agree completely. And I think, you know, for many, many years running audits all around the world, I think the biggest game changer findings that we've ever presented to clients, which they've then acted upon, have always come from that qualitative side. So it's so critical. And I think, you know, yes, it's hard to convince leaders, but the key is just to start showing the value, I guess, and to approach it in a way that, you know, demonstrates it's not just individuals' opinions, but it is a view or a concern that's held across the wider business. I don't want to hog it, but one question, one last question from me. Where's all this going, right? We're in this world now of AI. We've got sort of employee monitoring. We've got sentiment analysis. We've got all these incredible tech-driven ways of measuring and tracking things. Where's this go? Where do you see this going, this whole benchmarking piece over the next 5-10 years? Big question, sorry.
It depends on your mindset, whether you're like a little bit like Big Brother, you know, scary, or whether you're like, this could be great because the more data we have, the better experience we can design for our people, which is where I'm coming from actually. But I know there are companies, and we've seen this, you know, not a week goes by, we don't see some hideous report in the news of companies abusing some of these tools, right? So they're going, you know, monitoring the amount of hours people are online, for example. You know, that's not what this is about. And actually that's a really good point, because I had a really interesting discussion with a client recently about the purpose of this, right? So I think the purpose of research should be to uncover insights to help you make improvements. For me, that's what it's all about. And I think we've kind of got a bit muddled over the years, where we've kind of decided that the survey has to do lots of different things. So yes, we want to find out how people are feeling, but we also use it as a kind of, I suppose, a campaign to demonstrate we're listening. You know, in actual fact, whoever felt listened to when filling out a survey, you don't, do you? You know, you don't go, well, I felt really listened to because I got to fill in a, 20-minute survey online, kind of lost the way a little bit. So I think if we can go back to a place where we're using research for the whole purpose of it, which is to learn and understand and to then make improvements, I think we can go and get back to what it should have been about all the way through, rather than trying to muddy the waters with, using the survey as this sort of opportunity to run a whole campaign and demonstrate that we're listening and demonstrate. I mean, for example, I always hear people say, well, there's obsession with driving up response rates, and anyone that's kind of got a background in research will know that actually that's, why do you want high response rates? Well, because people are more engaged. Well, whoever said that if you get a high response rate, it must be people who are engaged? That doesn't what it tells you at all. We've kind of muddied the waters here. As long as you have a probability sample and you have the right number of people filling it out, you can generalize. Think about the census, right? You don't ask every single person in the UK, you take a sample. That's what research is all about. You don't actually need to ask everybody. I mean, it's great that you do, but so I think we've just muddied the waters around the purpose of the research in the first place. And I think we just need to get back to basics and think about this is research to give us insights to actually make some changes for the better to improve people's experience at work.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. It's all about action and making change for the better. Absolutely. I think we're coming up to the hour now, Katie. So any further questions come through, or?
No other questions come through, just a few thoughts and reflections. But yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. A really interesting discussion. Really great to see people asking questions on the chat. Really happy to sort of answer them. If you want to drop me a line, Katie, while I'm talking, Katie, put emails in the chat. You'll get a copy of the webinar and the report itself and the slides afterwards. And yeah, I would love to hear what you think on this. And we are talking about where we go next with the EX space research that we do ourselves. We have the EX report, which will be happening imminently, which is about kind of a state of the nation sort of piece. But we're also looking at other pieces of research. So we're asking questions like, why are we not moving the dial on EX and engagement? And we really want to work with some, quite deep with some organisations on that. So keep an eye out on that. And if you want to get involved with that, we are always looking to partner with organisations and find out what you're doing and just get you involved. So keep an eye out for that. But thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. And hopefully see you at the next webinar. So have a great day and see you soon.